Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder at Family Office Association. We have the return today of the one and only, and likely our most consistently requested guest that's been on multiple times that I've ever had. And that would be, as we're calling it, the extraordinary Adam Robinson. Now, the challenge that I have, oh, come on, Adam, you're well deserving of it. The challenge that I have is coming up with a title, because we're going to cover so much good stuff that one sentence really may not get it done. So maybe the extraordinary Adam Robinson on everything important. How about that? We'll kind of go with that for now.
I think we can maybe at the end. Maybe some of your family members or those listening in can come up with their own epithet.
I think that's a great idea. So those of you that are live, please feel free to share what you think would be a good title once we get the conversation going, and probably more towards the end. Well, it's safe to say today's featured guest is Adam Robinson. He's the founder at Robinson Global Strategies. He's an advisor to the world's top global hedge funds and family offices. It almost seems too basic for me to say to you, Adam, but welcome to the show.
Always good. I have to tell you with a smile, Angelo, that I always have to gird for one of our interviews, because I know they're going to be freewheeling and spontaneous and really deep. I always look forward to your questions. They're always provocative.
Well, thank you. And we will definitely push that envelope today. So actually, on that note,
Adam Robinson envelope pusher. I just pushed the envelope. So there we go.
And I think I'm going to join you in that today. So everyone, these are simply, it's meant for engaging and entertainment purposes. These are my views and my questions. They don't reflect Family Office Association. This is the Angelo Robles podcast. Adam has no one to answer to, so he doesn't even have to give any sort of explanation. Adam, let's get right to it. There's lots going on in the world right now, and lots that I don't feel like I really completely understand. And I'm going to start with the war. And that really goes to Putin, Russia, and what's going on in the Ukraine. I'm going to ask the question, and you may want to answer it any way you want. But my question for you is, what does Putin know that we don't?
Well, so we have to back up and zoom up to 100,000 feet to understand what's going on today. And by 100,000 feet, we might have to step back a few decades or more. And everyone listening should know that even when Adam, known as envelope pusher, begins to go down a track that it seems like I'm just dealing with abstract stuff. It's never merely to be abstract, but to come up with concrete, practical conclusions that will help us navigate our personal and professional lives. So with that said, boy, there's so many entry vectors for this question. I think we discussed this in one of our prior podcast conversations, Angelo, the book, The Fourth Turning.
Of course.
Okay, so the book, The Fourth Turning, came out, about 25 years ago, which is relevant. And so The Fourth Turning, the authors, both of them historians, a turning refers to a generation. And so the fourth turning refers to 4 generations, do the math. And in their estimate, let's just say a generation is 20 years. So figure 4 generations is 80 years. So why is that number relevant, 80 years? And so their thesis was that every generation goes through a 4-generation pattern, culminating on the fourth turning with global upheaval. So if we step back in time to 1776 as just one example of global upheaval, right? A bunch of colonies went up against the strongest empire in the world. And again, this is all going to tie back to the Ukraine in a sec, but I have to lay the groundwork. So in 1776, that no one would argue that that was a global upheaval. If you add 80 years to that, we get 1856, right? Leading up to the Civil War, the American Civil War. Again, massive global upheaval. If we add 80 years to that, we get 1936, which is the Depression leading into World War II. And if you add 80 years to that, you get 2016. And we're at the start of that cycle. So, and by the way, it's not that 1776 is a magical number. You can, the historians, and Howe is one of them, go back in time further than that. And so upheaval came right on schedule, right? It seemed like just when we were kind of orienting ourselves around COVID, the Ukraine crisis happened. And so really the way to think about that is that what's happening, and we are merely in the early stages of this, is a multi-inning. So it's the top of the first inning of an unraveling of far greater magnitude than we've already seen. And you know, you asked a question, what does Putin know that, say, we don't know? And there are two possibilities, you know, and if we look at things objectively, is that, and I'm not asserting anything, I'm merely asserting the possibilities. There are two possibilities. Putin is a shrewd politician and calculating. And the other possibility is that he's not shrewd, he's stupid and a bungler and is irrational. And so I think we can quickly dispense with the bungling, stupid, irrational for a couple reasons. One is, if he is that, then we're in real trouble, because it'll be right then. Oh my gosh, it's like a drunk driver. Like I don't want a drunk driver. I'd rather have a speeding driver who knows what he's doing. He's breaking the law, but at least that person knows what he's doing. And so we have to assume that he's a rational, strategic thinker. And I'm not getting into the morality of anything, right? War is never, anyway, I'm just looking at this in terms of how we can understand what he's doing. And so we are in a world that Putin wakes up one morning and decides, of all the many things that he could do today, he's going to invade the Ukraine. And that is the result of a complex calculus that he engaged in, looking at all of his different options. And he decided that the best option among those, given the obvious downside risks, that's the thing. He knew going into this all of the downside risks, and they're not even risks, the downside certainties, right? That he would be an international pariah, that various sanctions would be imposed. He anticipated, right? I'm a chess master, and he's from Russia, chess player. He's thinking multiple moves ahead. And so he's thought all this out and concluded on that morning, today I'm going to invade the Ukraine. That is my best move, given everything that I know. And so for us, not having the benefit of talking with him over coffee that morning, it is clear only that what we know wouldn't justify what he's doing. And so people go, oh, that's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. He's irrational. He's lost his mind. And we have to assume that, in fact, he hasn't lost his mind. Because if he's totally irrational, again, there's no way to judge what he's going to do next. And so he, by his lights, is moving in what he thinks is strategically best for him and or any number of other parties, including Russia and maybe the world, right? And I say that with complete detachment. And I say that because, again, this unfolding, if you know more about the history behind that, and you discover that in the month or two leading up to his ascension to power in Russia, he contacted the then head of NATO. His name escapes me right now. And this then retired, now he's retired, but the then head of NATO will confirm this. Putin said, we would like to join NATO. We, Russia, would like to join NATO. And he was rejected. NATO said, no, thanks. And instead, immediately, a few other nations bordering on the Russian border were admitted into NATO. And again, I am not justifying anything whatsoever. But it is clear in understanding anything that goes on in the world, there's far more that's going on that we don't know. And I know, Angelo, this is true for you. It was certainly true for me. And even as a boy, and I know George Orwell wrote about this. So as a boy, when I was 17, actually 16, Bobby Fischer was my mentor. And I would read stories about him. This is in the years leading up to his becoming a world champ. And I thought, oh, that story is just completely wrong. They don't know a thing. It's not even like a perspective on a situation. And then I realized, well, that isn't just true about what Adam knows. It's just generally true. Orwell said the same thing. And I'm sure to anyone listening to this right now, if you read a story in the news or see a story about something that you happen to have firsthand information about regarding one or more of the participants, you will realize the story is completely off base, right? Not an approximation of the truth. It's just wrong. And again, Orwell wrote about this, George Orwell. And so that's a general principle, is to assume that there's a whole lot more to the world that's going on that we have no idea about. And so yes. And so we don't have to speculate, we who are trying to navigate the world and to advise those, either family members or family offices or hedge funds, or as the case may be, advising others to navigate that world. Is that there's always something, lots of things that we don't know. I'll give you an example from financial markets, Angelo. There's a lot of hand-wringing now about whether we're in a recession or is a recession coming. And so they use the label, are we in a recession or is a recession coming? And that's such a meaningless question for two main reasons. One, recession is just a label. And so even if we could decide objectively that there is a recession, even then there's a question behind that question, like, okay, so we've established that there's a recession, and in past recessions, we tend to see the following sorts of things, right? Even that labeling and that conclusion, if we got to it, wouldn't be that helpful. Instead of just asking, are interest rates going to go higher or lower from here, right? Or commodity prices or whatever. And the other reason why the question is meaningless is we have dealt with a world the last 9 years, where we've had negative interest rates. Angelo, think about that. Negative interest rates, where borrowers were paid to borrow. Really, you got to think about that. We're in a world where borrowers, not all, but some lucky borrowers get paid to borrow money. Imagine going into a bank and you apply for a loan. They go, oh, this is your lucky day. We're going to pay you. You don't pay us interest. We're going to pay you to take money off our hands. Thank you so much. And so given that, and people say, well, negative interest rates, that's so crazy. And remember, Angelo, it was 2 years ago, roughly we had along the one of our podcasts, where I think it was April 23rd, 2020, almost exactly 2 years ago, where oil prices settled negative on one day, right? Imagine if you showed up with a barrel of oil, they would fill it for you and pay you to take it away. And I'm being a little facetious here, a little more complicated than that, but still, we have negative interest rates. I don't remember discussing that when I was at Wharton, and negative oil prices. So given that, what else about the world don't I know and don't you, Angelo, know, right? This is really in the same way that given that Putin would ruin his political reputation permanently. I don't know that you're coming back from that. And make the decision that he made. And we have to assume it's rational. What else don't we know about the world? And which makes navigating it precarious, right? Because there are many things, and I know, Angelo, one of your missions is preparing family offices for disasters, right? We're gonna get to that. And so we're in a world where we have to assume that there's tons that we don't know. And again, I'm talking to everyone listening to me right now. You'll hear a voice in your head, or you'll hear someone else say to you, huh? And it's always with a scrunched up face. They'll always go, huh, that doesn't make any sense. Huh, oh, that's weird. And then they stop thinking about it. Instead, you got to go, whenever you say, huh, that doesn't make any sense, really what that means is your model of reality is wrong.
Exactly.
Right? And you're looking at the world going, huh, gold should be going lower, but it's going higher. Huh, oh, that just doesn't make any sense. And there's always something very powerful behind that gold move or that political move or whatever. And so really, when things don't make sense, that's the starting point of analysis, the starting point, either for an opportunity or a risk.
So in terms of what Putin did, look at the world backlash, the Russian economy, it's a disaster. So for him to make a decision that he feels is in the best long-term interest of his country, it is wickedly impacting his people in the short term, and that short term may last a long time.
Well, be careful. We gotta watch our words, Angelo. I didn't say he thought it was in the best interest of the country. I said it's the best choice he could make, right? And right. So, that's why I said, let me go back and listen to Adam Envelope Pusher, my language. I said that he woke up one morning and that was the best choice he could make for him and whatever other parties, including Russia, right? So I'm not even making a judgment. I'm not being cynical about this, but he thought that's my best move on the chessboard.
I'm going to follow.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Follow up on that. The follow-up is there are some people that believe that Putin secretly is the world's richest person. Is this strictly for him and his oligarchs and their personal capital, a decision that he made?
So let's take a look at that, okay? And we don't have to speculate. It is clear that he has access to information regarding world events that by which information he can profit greatly. What we would consider insider information, but it's better than insider information. As a state actor, he's generating the very event that he's going to profit from, right?
Yes.
And so the thing is that I am sure that he has unimaginable wealth. That is clear. And so could he get more? Remember, there are so many downside risks, and I mean even to his own personal safety, right? So the question is, and he's figured again, in his calculus of looking at all the variables, all the counter moves, right? He's a chess player, all the counter moves that are going to be made against me. Yes, it is in my eye. In other words, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's his decision. So what's best for me, right? And we can.
It's probably inconsequential, but is it coincidence or not that he made the initial invasion right after China hosting the Winter Olympics? Did they basically tell him, you know, you're doing it, you're not going to do it leading into the Olympics, you wait? So
we can engage in those kinds of interesting questions. Your questions are always so, provocative and thought, really make you think. And so the reason I don't entertain those thoughts for long is you go down lots of rabbit holes. And at the end of the day, there's no way Angelo or Adam can decide with any kind of certainty. And even if we could decide, like, let's say at the end of the day, we could determine with some degree of certainty, probability, that yes, he actually waited for the end of the Olympics. Let's say that were so, we could determine that. Is that new piece of information going to affect anything we do going forward? For me, not at all. Now, maybe for the Pentagon in understanding, what are the alliances going on, right? What are the tells, like a poker tell? Or better, bridge might be a better game, like the game of bridge, right? Where you're signaling, what can we infer? But unless really you're like a four-star general in the Pentagon dealing with these issues, or a major U.S. politician, say in the Senate or Congress, or in the White House, we don't have to indulge in those speculations.
You mentioned that Putin may feel with Ukraine and other countries that already did it as potentially being part of NATO, that he's surrounded. About a month or so ago, I started to wonder, just trying to be contrarian and thinking differently. And I got lambasted in my own family. I said to myself, how would the US feel if China were to get very, very cozy, maybe even militarily, with Mexico and Canada? I don't think that would go over too well here.
Right. And to press that analogy home, they've already established bases along the Canadian border and the Mexican border, and then they decide to go to Cuba, right? Because, wait, no. And so again, war is heinous in all its forms, right? And so I'm not in any way justifying his choice, not in any way. I'll just state flat out that it's it beggars adjectives that would capture how unconscionable it is, right?
Of course.
So many levels, really, it's heartbreaking. And so, but for us to think through and to navigate the world, and again, we have to ask ourselves, what does Putin know, not just about Russia and the Ukraine and NATO, but what else does he know about the world and everything else, right? It's a very big global chessboard that he's playing on.
Exactly.
Right. And as you just brought up, okay, China's another piece. And I'm not saying they're pieces working together. I'm not. I just don't know. That's the thing. And I admit I don't know. And it's really important, again, for family members and those listening in, that you work on the basis of what you know, as opposed to what you think or what you hope for, and or are afraid of. We start with a basis in knowledge, and then we have to, as we go out on the branch of uncertainty, the branch gets a little thinner out there. It's not going to support our weight. We don't go too far out, but really to anchor on what we know. And it is clear, going back to your initial question,
right?
There's so much about the world we don't know, and of a frightening magnitude,
What, Adam? What do you think that? Let's go back to China.
Sure.
So China's looking at this, seeing how, at least from the surface, the Russian economy, the banking system, it's being destroyed. They look, of course, at the US as being, let's go with the word adversary. And are they learning what is working, what is not working? And I look at what they're doing with the digital yuan, their connections in Africa and supply chains, and we're going to get to some of that a little bit later. If I'm going to assume that Putin and Russia are making some mistakes, I'm getting a feeling China is going to be a little bit more aware of what's working and not working.
Well, wait, with all that, what was your question? Oh, you mean is China watching what they're doing?
Yes, basically, yes.
Of course they would, right? I mean, of course they would. And I mean, they would be fools not to. We're watching what they're doing, right? Everyone in the world is watching. Okay, so what can we conclude given what Putin has chosen to do? What else, what new information, what light does that shed, say, on supply chains in Africa, say, or digital currencies, say? And so we update in a Bayesian probability kind of way, we update our priors and go, oh, okay, I was 60% sure that yesterday, today I'm 68% sure, right? And it's clear they're watching, but they would be fools not to. And again, you said something, and I want to agree, but we have to be careful about the words we use. You use the word mistakes, and in any given situation, I don't know that anyone's ever done anything in a martial way, in a battle or a war, that there weren't what we would deem from the sidelines mistakes, right? Heck, you'd be an armchair quarterback, and Tom Brady is going to make mistakes on the football field. Go, that Brady, what does he know? He's an idiot. But he's the best quarterback, right? And so it's easy to be, to call those mistakes from the sidelines. And the key thing in battle, actually in any situation, is to use those mistakes, right? To use the mistakes. Okay. In the same way that with a poker hand, you got to use the hand. I shouldn't. Doggone it, I raised too much, but you got to play the hand that you've got in the prior decisions that you made. It's all very, it's a calculus in the world, and you're thinking about the world based on uncertainties and certain assumptions. Like you and I are assuming here that Putin is entirely rational. Again, I'm not getting into ethics, the morality of that, right? Let's push that aside. But that he is a rational being, as opposed to an irrational, temperamental, he's just decided to do this. He's gotten angry, he's just gonna do it. Is to think, okay, let's assume he's rational. And yeah. Yeah.
Back to the China part of it. So, okay, with Russia, the impact on the US, for sure, oil, wheat, commodities. But with China, it gets so much worse with our supply chains that became aware of our weaknesses years ago in terms of the public eye, probably not that much better. I look at our electronics, I look at our pharmaceuticals. Has much changed in the last 2 or 3 years? I don't see any way out that we're not screwed if they were to be very wanting to be very difficult with the US.
So, but it's difficult for them as well.
Well,
right?
the money that comes in from it, sure.
Well, but everything in social order, right? We've seen videos coming out of Shanghai with the drones telling people, you've seen these, right? Like where drones are flying by helicopter and going, suppress your desire for freedom, stay inside, you know? And so China is grappling with its own problems internally. And I don't just mean, you know, future revenues and supply chains. They got too few young people, right? Because that one child per family policy. And of those too few young people, a disproportionate number are male. I think something like 11 to 9, male to female, single.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
That's huge. That's a big problem. And so China has demographic problems. They have export problems. Europe is shrinking and slowing down, big thing, right? And so, you know, the thing is, you know, your larger question, I talked about things that we don't know, right? In that sense, like we're talking about, oh, what don't we know about with the Ukraine crisis and beyond it? And given, what don't we know about the world economy, given negative interest rates? What the, right? It's really, we have all awakened the last 3 years. We're all Alice in Wonderland. It's Adam in Wonderland and Angelo in Wonderland, and everybody who's listening, we're in Wonderland, right? And when Alice drops down the rabbit hole, and this weird world, like that she's the, you know, the Mad Hatter and the cards and everything, and Humpty Dumpty and all of that, she has to learn how to navigate that bizarre world. And the thing is, Angelo, that our entire world on a mundane level, is predicated on things that we know to be true. I'm using air quotes. We know these things to be true, and in fact, they never were. Right? And so we've gone about ordering our lives without thinking about things. As one of my favorite philosophers, Lord Alfred Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, he said once that a civilization advances to the extent that it can do, he used the word operations. It has operations so that it doesn't have to think about things or that particular thing as much as it used to, if at all. In other words, then, like, for example, if you and I, if we wanted to travel to Europe 100 years ago, well, we'd have to, we got to get a steamer. We got a plan. It's going to be a long trip. We got lots of thinking involved around that. And now we just go to Orbit, so we just book our flights or American Express. And so the whole modern world, with the help of technology, but not just technology, we have been, I was going to say walking through a world. Oh no. Everyone listening to me right now has got to realize we've been sleepwalking through a world that we assumed was true. Various things. For example, I'm just going to throw out some things. If you want to borrow money, you gotta pay for it. Real estate always goes up. This will really get you. If there's a fire in my building, the fire department will come, right? Like I know this to be true, but maybe not. So let's go down that rabbit hole for a second. We know about fractional, banks have fractional reserve requirements, right? They're not required to keep all their money, right? They can keep like 3% of it. I forget what the latest reserve requirements are. And because only 3% of people on a bad day are going to ask for their money, and the rest we're going to lend out, right? Well, that's also true of insurance companies, right? That's also based on the same kind of thing. And it's also based on public services. Public services are also based on the same model, right? We assume that if there's a fire in my block in Soho, that the fire department that's not too far, the closest fire department to me is the one from Ghostbusters. Remember that, the Ghostbusters thing? Yeah, the original Ghostbusters.
Yeah, forget it.
It's like 3 blocks from here. So I know if there's a fire here, I'm okay. I don't think about fires because I know the fire department's going to show up within, I don't know, 10 minutes. But suppose there were many fires going on. Suppose there was a breakdown in social order and there were lots of fires. Then the fire department isn't going to show up exactly when I need it. And I estimated once, it was about a year before, remember the demonstrations from a couple summers ago? Right?
Of course.
Right. And so I've lived most of my adult life either in Tribeca or Soho. And there was a mini crime wave in Tribeca, in Soho, right? And the police were overwhelmed. And so really, it was very scary. And I estimated about 3 years ago, get this, Angelo, in New York City, there's one police, I was about to say policeman, police person, police officer, there we go. I don't think I can offend anyone with that. Police officer for every 2 New York City blocks. The average New York City block has 1,400 people. That means there's one police officer for every 2,800 people. Now imagine there's widespread social disorder. And we have to imagine things like that, Angelo, right? You know, and I know
I do disaster prep for billionaires.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Like I'm teeing up that, like I knew that was something. And so disaster prep, like, what happens if you can't get access to your bank account? What happens? What happens if the US power grid goes down? And I'm not talking about a temporary blackout. I'm talking about for months. And you know, to go back to the war, metaphors, Eisenhower said, in preparing for battle, plans are useless, but the act of planning is indispensable, right? The simple act of planning, it rarely turns out exactly as you envisioned, but the very fact that you've gone through all these possibilities, you come out ahead. Right? Or not necessarily ahead, but you're prepared, right? You're nimble. And back in the 1970s, so before you were born, young man, in the 1970s, okay, I'm just teasing me too. So in the 1970s, there was an oil embargo, right? And even you, young man, you read about that oil embargo, and every major oil company in the world lost money, except one, Royal Dutch Petroleum. Why? Because they had a couple of years before the embargo they had notebooks of different scenarios that they had worked through, scenario planning. And Royal Dutch Petroleum, actually, they just pulled a notebook off the shelf. They had already run through embargo. They knew exactly what to do, because they had already run through the scenario, right? And this is something so important for disaster planning, any kind of planning, and even, heck, you're a CEO or you're an investor or the head of a family office, the head of a family, is you have to go through these exercises, these little scenarios, you know, and do you remember the movie Hoosiers? Did you ever see that movie with Gene Hackman?
I love it. One of my favorites of all time.
Mine too. And there's one scene where, those of you who don't know, it's a basketball movie, one of the great sports movies of all time, with Gene Hackman, who plays a washed up NCAA coach who's now coaching this little team in Indiana. And they got 5 kids in the whole school who play basketball. That's it, 5 kids. And there was a 6th kid they later got, but there's 5 kids on the team. And one of the kids does something. One of the players doesn't listen to Gene Hackman, so Gene Hackman benches his own kid. And now they got 4 kids to play the game. And those 4 kids, they wound up losing a 4-man team. And so if I were a basketball coach, I would have run through that scenario as a real scenario. Like, okay, we're now going to play a scrimmage game, you 4 against those 5. And they're going to swap, and they'll be 4 and you'll be 5. Like, what do we do? And or maybe I'd put a pebble in one of their shoes. Now, you're going to be hobbling a little bit, but intentionally, like, run through that scenario. What do we do? And it's so important that we think through these possibilities. And because you always hear politicians and even corporate CEOs and those who have fiduciary positions of trust in the public say, well, there's no way we could have imagined that eventuality. Well, there's no way you did, but you could have, and you should have run through that scenario. Don't tell me you couldn't have. And so it's very important that, again, family offices, family members, and everyone, either in your personal life or professional life, run through scenarios. Actually, I'm going to give you a scenario that'll really blow your mind. And I'm not talking about my living 5 blocks from the World Trade Center on 9/11 back then. That was something I never envisioned. Oh, a plane is going to smash into a building. So get this, Angelo. There was I think it was October, there was a rainstorm in New York. And it was supposedly set a record in Central Park. Okay. Now I live in Soho on West Broadway. And it's a normal street. And you've walked down West Broadway in Soho, okay? The rain was so high, it flooded the gates, that to get to my apartment building, I had to wade through water that was mid-thigh high. Got a picture of that. Adam's walking down a sidewalk, and the water comes up to the middle of my thigh. Now, I'm not tall, but I'm not a hobbit. Right? It came up to the middle of my thigh. Like if I said, Angelo, how deep do you think water could get on a New York City street? You'd say,
like 2 or 3 inches.
2 or 3 inches, maybe up to your ankles. Oh no, it was mid-thigh. And it was surreal. I would never in a million years have thought, wow, water can get that high? It's not a scenario I would have envisioned, right? And so in this wonderland that we all find ourselves in, we do not have the luxury of saying, oh, that doesn't make any sense. How could we imagine these things? We have to imagine the unimaginable. Like, this is so key.
Which really goes back to my clickbaity title of disaster prep for super rich or billionaires. You gave away some of my secrets, by the way, but the audience that is live or listening, you deserved it. These are things that families pay 6 figures for, if not more. A couple of things come to mind. We'll stay on this topic a little bit, and then we'll move on.
Go for it.
You mentioned a couple of things. The power grid for months, the power grid going down in New York City for 3 days. No electricity. The banks are closed. You can't access your crypto accounts online. You have anarchy, probably not the first day, but by the second or third. And in New York, the bad people, quote unquote, have weapons. You don't. You can't exit because theoretically you could, but if 11 million people are trying to do it at the same time, how are they going to do it and where are they going to go? In other words, it doesn't take weeks for this to really evolve to what you're describing. It could happen in 2 or 3 days. And look at the foundation that we're seeing in San Francisco now, in Seattle and Portland, and some of that is in New York. It is getting worse.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick anecdote, and then I'm going to talk about a congressional study that was done
Okay.
Some years ago. So I'm all of 22 years old. One summer night, in a few months, I was to leave to go to England to go to grad school. And anyway, it's about 8 o'clock at night, 8:30 at night, summer night, and I'm next to the UN in a little park overlooking the FDR. So those of you, even if you're not familiar with New York, I'm in a tiny little park. There's a highway that encircles Manhattan, and I'm looking out over miles of Brooklyn and Queens. Okay, twilight, 8:30. The lights in the park go off, and I go, oh, that's weird. I guess it's closing time. Tiny little park, like the kind that the neighbors would walk their little dog, their little Jack Russell or whatever. Anyway, I walk towards First Avenue and I go, it's really dark around here. I guess a street light went out. And it took me about 30 seconds to realize that there were no lights at all anywhere I could see in the immediate buildings. And it was a little misleading because the cars coming by, the headlights, you could see those. But when I looked up at the buildings, I went, oh, there's no lights. And I ran back down the hill all of a block, 15, 20 seconds. And I looked out for miles over all of Brooklyn and Queens, and there wasn't a light in sight. That is surreal. Like in New York City, with all the lights in New York City.
Now, was that 1977, the big blackout?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So I'm in there, and I the very first thought that occurred to me, right? I'm 22 years old. And the very first thought, and I'm a law-abiding citizen, but little 22-year-old me, not worldly wise, not street smart whatsoever, my immediate thought was, uh-oh, there's gonna be a crime wave. Now notice, I didn't say I'm worried about myself. I wasn't, but I thought there's gonna be a crime wave. And about 5 or 6 days later, when the New York Post and the New York Times, the Daily News started reprinting, indeed, there was an immediate crime wave. I mean, immediate. And it's not like people are waiting around like, oh, can't wait for the next blackout. Okay, so this is, people can dig this up. I'm doing this from memory. Some 13, 14, 15 years ago, there was a bipartisan congressional committee set up to study what would happen if the US power grid went down. Now, the difference between a New York blackout and the US power grid is that if you were inconvenienced, and you would have been if you were on Manhattan, you could have driven across one of the bridges and gone to visit some relatives or friends in New Jersey or Connecticut. Okay, but now imagine the entire US power grid is down. So get this. Again, I'm doing it from memory. It was a bipartisan committee. They estimated that the cascading crises that would occur if the power grid went down, and it wouldn't be for a few days, it'd be for a few months, that the cascading crises would lead to deaths that could run into the multiple tens of millions. That'll keep you up at night. And it was a bipartisan, and it was just looking at the power grid goes down. What's the chain of events? Remember, you can't get food. You can't get food. You don't have access to your bank account. There are all kinds of things. And they're running through. And of course, that's the worst case scenario. But if I told you that the number of deaths would run into the thousands, you'd go, whoa, that's very serious. Oh no, they estimated in the millions. And in a few months, just from the power grid going down, something as innocuous as that. And as you know, in the 1850s, there was the Carrington event where the solar flare knocked out the internet back then, which was the telegraph system.
Yes.
Yeah, it's much worse today.
One of my billionaires mentioned, well, of course, 2 hours outside of San Francisco, we have a compound. It has solar, it has food storage for 2 years, it has this, it has that, and that's all good. Great. And let's assume that you get there. Your neighbors are going to be jealous of what you have, because when you haven't eaten for a couple of days and have no clean water, the suburban housewife would bash you with a can.
Oh,
Now,
yeah.
so I'm talking to him, and it was a him. I go, you probably have some security. Oh, yeah, of course. So the security person is not going to care about their own family. They're going to care about you. What do you think happens in the most barbarian system like that, where there is lawlessness? You're going to be sleeping. The biggest, strongest security guard is going to take you out and make that his or her compound for their family. And he had no answer for that.
Right. Now, the thing is, I don't want the people listening to us think that, oh, Angelo and Adam are just like, doom and gloom.
Preppers.
Because we're not. I'm just saying that you have to, any more than I, have a pair of Wellingtons just in case it floods again, and I got to wade through, 3 feet, 2.5, 3 feet of water in the sidewalk, mind you, on the sidewalk of Manhattan. And so it's just that we have to run through these scenarios. And really, here's the way to think about it, Angelo. And this is the way to think about the thought exercise for the gentleman that you were having a conversation with, right? Your friend, or client, even. And so, if it became necessary to avail yourself of that security system, right? If things got that bad, then they're way worse, right? In other words, by the time you go, oh, I need that safety system, then all bets are off, right? You can't depend on the police. You can't depend on the phone system, even. Your contact with the outside world is, and again, if that sounds outlandish for people, who would have projected 3 years ago that COVID would have brought the world down?
Exactly.
Right? Or that out of nowhere, Putin invades the Ukraine, and thousands, lots of people civilians getting killed. It's the things that we would never have imagined. And again, this is the world we're in, and you got to ask yourself. Sorry.
I'm going to save a little bit to the end, a little bit of Nassim Taleb and how to be anti-fragile, and related to that, Donald Rumsfeld. There's the known knowns and the unknown unknowns. But if they're unknown unknowns, how could you plan for them, or how could you be anti-fragile? But if the audience doesn't stay with us towards the end of the 2 hours, they're not going to get that, Adam.
Uh-oh.
So, they're going to have to be a little patient. You mentioned something I was going to bring up. Let's get right to it. COVID. I'm going to mention these 3 things in slow order. COVID, control, a new world order. What do you know about COVID? And how is this impacting societies?
So, okay, well, that's a multi-layered question, as you tend to ask. And so, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to ask questions. That's all. That's right. I'm not asserting anything. And so again, we ask questions about the world and we have to assume that there's a whole lot more going on than we can possibly know. And again, anyone listening to me right now, I'm talking to you, that when you read about things or watch on video, something about things in the world that you happen to have firsthand information on, you'll realize that the reported version is very different from what's actually that you know about, that you personally know about. So COVID. So, that again, I'm not going to assert anything, I'm just going to ask questions, you know? And so here's a question I had in the early days of COVID. You may recall, Angelo, that there were a series of videos. I think it was late December 2019. It might have been early 2020, coming out of China, where they built a hospital in a week. Do you remember that? Where they built a hospital in a week?
Clearly, yes.
Exactly right. Exactly right. They built a hospital in a week, and they filmed it with great fanfare. Why did they do that? I'm not going to say anything more. Just why would they make a big deal that they had built a hospital in a week? Yeah, really, if you go down that rabbit hole, and I'll give people a hint. I estimated back of the envelope, there are about 30,000 hospitals currently in China. So again, I just ask a question. And so later, why did the World Health Organization wait so long before they said anything? Right? They didn't say anything until the third week in January.
Because they get a lot of money from China?
Well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm only going to ask questions. I only ask, why did they wait? Right? Why did they wait? And then when they finally said something, again, this is public record, they said it is a global health emergency, but we recommend no travel restrictions at this time. So I merely ask, why did they say no travel restrictions? And so I don't know anything. I don't know a thing. And I know that COVID has hit China badly. It's hit the entire world badly. And I also know there's lots of stuff I don't know about. And when you see things in the news, whether it's about COVID or the Ukraine or anything, is to go, well, don't just go, that's weird or that's terrible. Because that's really when people stop thinking about things. Remove the morality from it and assume that people are making rational decisions. And then just keep asking questions about that. And you'll come to your own conclusions. Again, I assert nothing here, Angelo. Well, I just ask questions.
Adam, you might be rubbing off on me because I'm going to have some questions for you.
Oh,
it does appear. No, let me ask it as a more open-ended question.
Sure.
Are the people of the world more compliant than decades ago?
I don't know. And you know, we'd have to come up with some kind of metric for that. You know, how do we define compliant? How would we measure it? You know, and at the end of the day, again, you always ask such interesting thought experiments, right? And questions is, if I could answer that right now to our mutual satisfaction, let's say we could determine, yes, people are more compliant now. Am I going to change any decision I make going forward with that new piece of information? I don't think so. And again, if I were a politician, or I was the chief of police, or I had to deal with social order or something, then compliance, then I would be looking at that. That would be relevant to me. But it's not relevant to me in my world, and I have to conserve my bandwidth, right? The things that I can think about. And again, I try to move, just like Buffett, only invest where he has an edge, right? In industries he knows really well, and there are other filters he uses. But I think about domains that I can come to firm conclusions on, and everything else, are a matter of mere probabilities.
But I probably have another question that will fit into a
Oh,
similar.
I'm sure you do.
And we're going to dive into a subject on this deeper in 10 minutes. But that basically, again, in just looking at things with no statistics, are there powerful forces at work to weaken the resolve? And I'm going to hear about this, of men. And I was very specific there. Let's be all compliant, homogenous, obey orders. You go to college, you get debt, you go into the workforce, you're a cog in the wheel, you marry, you fit into society, you pay your taxes, you die. I mean, that's probably, and I'm being generous about owning property and getting married, but that's probably how it's going to be for the vast majority of people. Are there powerful organizational forces at work to keep the status quo and to weaken the resolve of, I mean, I said men, so let me stick to it.
Yeah. Okay. So let me jump in. Once again, you ask a multi-layered Angelo question, and so again, I'm gonna start by saying I don't know, and then I'm going to come back at the question. So, but my starting point is I don't know, and my next answer is I don't need to engage in that hypothesis, right? Because one way or another, I don't know, so I don't have to assert. But what you said is a very subtle question, and it ties back to that theme we discussed earlier of things we know about the world, right? And so one of the things we know about the world, at least say in the wealthier countries in the world, is that we know there's a certain narrative. I say we know until about 3 years ago, but the narrative was you go to a good school, you work hard, you get good grades, you go out on some kind of career track, and you find someone you love and care about, and you get married and you have kids, and then they repeat the cycle, right? That was, right, in a sense, the American dream.
Yes.
Right. And so these are things we know about. Sorry, as individuals, each person knew. Now they might go, oh man, it's too bad I'm not going to rise too high up on that ladder. Or people might go, oh, I'm at the top of the ladder. Yay. But we took that for granted, right? We took that for granted. And I'll tell you something, Angelo, is the entire, so the compliance was based on people are compliant because there's the way to think about it is no animal, no organism wants to be told what to do. And so they'll accept being told what to do under certain circumstances, right? Under emergencies, or they're afraid. Like if I have a medical issue, I'm going to go to a doctor because he or she knows what to do. I'm going to put my trust in their hands, right? And so we know, I'm using quotes here because I'm saying we know, but maybe we shouldn't take for granted that that the people in control, ostensible control, are fiduciaries always operating in the best interest of everybody, like to the extent that they can, and increasingly you see that narrative, people have begun to question that, and like, oh, maybe they either don't know or they do know, but maybe they're not so interested in just purely for the public welfare, right? In a sense, here's another way to think about it: is people have become more cynical about the world, you know, and less trusting, right? And even when I know this, Adam Robinson, even when I know this, when I read stories or I look at videos, I have to remind myself, wait a second, you don't know anything about what actually went on, even though you're watching it, but you don't know. Like, oh, there's an accident. You see the video of the aftermath of the accident, but you don't know how it happened, right? And so there are lots of things you don't know. And so I have to always remind myself that I'm always more or less mistaken about things. So wait, I'm going to answer your question, because when you said about compliant, here's what I think. I think that what we've discovered, and we saw it first, actually, interestingly enough, in Canada.
Exactly.
With the truckers.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so think about that. Canadians are like nice Americans without the bad karma. And the Canadians were going, no way. Right? When was the last time you thought nice Canadians were gonna rebel like that? And I think that was a sign that, here's the thing, you can push people too far, people will comply, right? Until they don't. And once you cross that line, it's really hard to step back from that.
Although then look what the power does, creates executive orders in a centralized system of banks and crypto exchanges to threaten to freeze, and actually, I guess, did, the accounts of people. If you want to arrest them, then go and arrest them and tow their truck. But to do that,
it was even worse, Angelo. They said, if we think that you, Angelo, if we suspect that you, Angelo, let's say Angelo, your Canadian clone, if we
feel sorry for him.
Yes, if we think that you wired money, if you sent the money, we're going to freeze your account. If we suspect that. Now, notice that they backed off, though, that they said that and they quickly backed off. And then the interesting thing, again, I only ask questions. And so I know that just because two things follow each other, that the antecedent didn't cause what followed. But to me, I only ask right after that, when it was clear the truckers were not going to back down. All of a sudden, COVID restrictions around the world began to be lifted. And I just ask why? What changed? Was there new health information, right?
No.
Not that I know of. Again, ostensibly, we are following the science, and I only ask questions. So what new scientific facts do we have today that we didn't have yesterday? And now we go, go about your business. And so I think that was a political decision. And so again, I don't need to go down those rabbit holes. And so I'm tactfully dancing around your question. But again, but I am telling people, like, if you begin to ask these questions, you'll form your own conclusions. And that's all I just ask questions.
I mean, you mentioned they were going to do something that seems outrageous, and then they scaled back. I'm going to say that might have been tactical. Here in the US, it was announced 7-8 months ago. I think we're going to really want to tax your unrealized capital gains. Did I think it had a chance to go through? No. But do I think it plants in our mind that we're going to come back to this? We're going to slowly get you on board, and the masses accumulated to this point of view. I think it's strategic that they mentioned that, but maybe that's just how.
So again, it's here's one thing I know, that if someone in power wants to do something, they'll lay the groundwork for it.
Exactly.
Before they do it. And so they'll start to mobilize public opinion, and so things don't happen overnight. They're precursors to it. And for most things in the world, say declaring a war or something, that they're precursors that go on, right? It's not going to come out of the blue. We can't just do it. We're going to have to mobilize public opinion beforehand, for a while beforehand. And so when you start to see things, again, now I'm talking not to you, Angelo, but to everyone listening, that when you see things, and and realize, why are they telling me this now? What's the point of that? And sometimes these are trial balloons. Like, let's just float this. Let's just see how people will respond. And I'm not imputing bad intentions to politicians who want to do that. You could be the best person in the world wanting to do things truly for the common good. And you'd still have to go through those steps, right? For the common good, I need them to do X. So before I do X, I got to start to condition them. And it's for their own good, right? That I'm saying that's the most charitable explanation. And I only ask questions. I push envelopes and I ask questions.
Adam, are you a fan of Star Wars by chance?
Sure.
Okay. I like the phrase, the Sith believe in absolutes. Should we be careful? And I think you actually hinted at it earlier. We believe something to be true, that we're not going to walk into 3 foot of water in Tribeca in New York until it's proven otherwise. Should we be very, very careful not to believe in absolutes? This can't be done. This will happen.
Okay, so that's really, that's such a, here's one way to think about it. So I have a heuristic or an algorithm that I use, and when you start to entertain those scenarios, think of the most wild possible thing that couldn't possibly happen. And that's the thing we haven't prepared against. And right, so like we keep, as a civilization, we keep, I remember they asked Gandhi once, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, I think it would be a good idea. And, but anyway, so in civilization, we think we're safe and secure, which goes back to Alfred North Whitehead's statement that civilization advances by increasing the number of things it doesn't have to think about, right? And so for example, in the Old West, if Adam and Angelo, let's say strangers, passed each other in New York City, I wouldn't have to worry that gunslinger, Angelo the gunslinger, is not going to pull out a gun and shoot me. But in the Wild West, that would be a consideration. I'd have to think about that. There's that guy in the tall cowboy hat with those fancy boots. That's Angelo, the gunslinger. You know, he shot Wyatt Earp. And so there are all kinds of things we take for granted. And they're always about the security that we feel maybe we shouldn't. And again, I'm not saying you have to do this all the time, but clearly we're in a world that's a lot less stable than we thought, a whole lot less.
Adam, I have, and yes, this is an audience hook. I think I have perhaps my 3 most important questions for you. We're going to go back to back to back. Here they are. I believe I once heard you say, if you're not confused, then you're not paying attention. What did you mean?
So I said that in reference to a Niels Bohr quote, right? Niels Bohr, the great physicist, had just finished a lecture in quantum mechanics. And he told the audience, I don't know, it's like in 1930 or something. And he said to the audience, having finished, he said, now, if you aren't confused by everything that I just said, you didn't understand a word. And because quantum mechanics is confusing, right? It is. And so I would say that about the world. If you don't look around in bewilderment, and there should be an undertone of fear, right? I say an undertone of fear. Angelo, when you and I walk down a sidewalk, to go back to the sidewalk, when you lift your right foot a couple inches off the ground and you extend it, when you put your foot back down on the ground, you expect it to be met by a firm sidewalk. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Like we've hit a curve, we don't even realize we've actually hit a street, and we step a little further and we stumble a little bit. We go, oh, but we have to reorient ourselves, right? We go, oh, that's right. I stepped off a curb without realizing it. And but we expect the ground to be there. We expect our foot to meet solid ground. And we expect if there's a fire, the fire department's going to show up. There are all kinds of embedded expectations. I expect that when I want my money, I can go to an ATM, or I can go to my online and go to my bank and wire transfer money. Like, there, pay them. I expect that. It's really funny. Literally until about 3 days ago, I hadn't seen cash for 2 years. I had not seen a cash bill whatsoever, because I didn't use my debit, ATM card. So I just relied totally on credit cards, Amex. And anyway, I expect, so yesterday I had some $20 bills, and it was like, oh my gosh, so novel, cash. And so I went to, because I know crypto and digital cash, like, anyway, so I know that when I take a $20 bill, when I hand it to the store owner and ask for an iced coffee, they're going to give me an iced coffee and some change back. I know this. Well, what happens if they didn't one day? And again, I said the entire modern world, really, to step back just a little bit, this is an important framework. The entire modern world hasn't worked for at least 75, 76 years.
That was one of my big three questions. You beat me to it.
Okay, so wait. So ask the question, and then I'll frame it around that.
Adam, the modern world doesn't work. Why?
Funny you should ask that question. So in the aftermath of World War II, right? We're coming out of the Great Depression, a global war, millions of people who died, cities and countries devastated. And we had to rebuild the world, right? We had to rebuild the world. And the rebuilding was done on the back of the American dream. And if you think about it, Angelo, and I'm inviting everyone to think about it, the American dream was predicated on the willingness of the American consumer to go into debt to buy things he or she didn't really need, right? And so, like, I want what mom and dad had. I just want more of it and bigger. So if they had an apartment, I want a home. If they had a home, I want a bigger home. Nope, I want 2 homes. And I want a TV set in every room, and I want 2 cars at least. And so the engine of the American dream was debt, whether it's personal debt, corporate debt, or government debt. And the punchline's coming up in about 100 seconds. So we started piling up debt because we knew that we would grow, right? And there's only, debt is okay, I say okay, debt is viable if you can grow your way out of it, right? If I start a restaurant and I take on some debt to expand my restaurant, I need more customers coming into my restaurant, Adam's Pizzeria, and I need each customer to buy more food, right? More pizzas and more customers. So I need growth, either consumption or population. So now let's apply that to the world. The entire world was built up on debt, predicated that we would keep growing population-wise and consumption-wise. And it never occurred to anybody what would happen if they both went negative simultaneously and started accelerating to the downside. So the average debt per human being, Angelo, per working age human being globally is I think $45,000. Now you think about that. That means that someone who lives on subsistence earnings of say $1,000 a year, that person's also on the hook for 45,000.
That's a problem.
That's a real problem. And with interest rates soaring, that's a big, big problem. It's compounding. And so we've accumulated this massive amount of debt because we assumed that we would keep growing. There'd be more people who would be buying more Teslas, right? Or more pizzas, more Adam pizzas, I hope so. And so consumption would go up and population would go up. But pre-COVID, this is a pre-COVID fact, the number of people in the US, every country in Europe, Canada, Australia, and Japan, again, this is pre-COVID, right? Pre-COVID. The number of people, more people died in those countries than were born. Think about that. More people died than were born. Not a slowing growth rate, a negative, negative growth. It's going down, right? And population.
In theory, in thousands of years, you'll have no people left in Japan. Seriously.
Well, oh no, it's not thousands of years. In Japan, so there's something called, there's a statistic, I don't remember in Japan exactly what it is, but the number of workers to support every retired person. And I think it's 4 workers for every retired person right now. I'm not talking about your parents. There's 4 workers for every retired person. And I think it may be closer to 3. And I think by the year 2050, it'll be 2. There'll be 2 workers that from their paychecks, they got to support an elderly person. And an elderly person with a lot of health, like health issues, and like, that's not easy, right? Not cheap. And so the entire world, I mentioned China and its problems. So China, realizing that their 1 child per family policy that had gone on for so long was actually not such a good idea. And in the last few years, they've repealed that and have been encouraging their citizens, get married, have kids, right? It's been a massive campaign.
Right.
And last year, they had the lowest birth rate in 50 years. That even with the please have kids,
and incentives to have kids.
Exactly right. They're the lowest birth rate in 50 years. And so they are in big trouble. The entire world is, because we've piled up all this debt, assuming that we were going to keep growing. Again, we knew that to be true. Isn't there a population problem? No. And Elon Musk, you'll remember that you and I talked about this some years ago. Elon Musk has jumped on that bandwagon. He said the population demographics is one of the 2 or 3 most serious problems in the world right now. Not overpopulation, population shrinking. The only areas that are growing, Angelo, are Africa and the Middle East, and a few countries in Asia. But their growth rate is slowing. So it's not negative yet. They're growing at a much slower rate. And I think if those countries go negative about 2050 or 2060.
There's a variety of reasons for this. You hinted at some of them with debt, and I hinted at it earlier with the cog in the wheel. And there is something, it's a very sensitive topic. I actually touched on it about half an hour ago. Again, I'm leaving a lot of hooks here. That's coming up in about 10 more minutes. My third of my kind of back-to-back questions for you. Why as humans do we dismiss warnings that in retrospect were so easy to spot?
So I talk about this in my book. I haven't published it yet, but I should. How Not to Be Stupid.
Okay.
And I mentioned that Buffett had endorsed it. I think I told you. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Yeah. And so I gave you a copy, and his endorsement was, this book is loaded with good ideas and appropriate warnings. And the problem it's very, very kind, very, very sweet of him to give me that endorsement, is that I know that human beings dismiss warnings. They don't pay any attention to a warning. And one of my good friends, RP Eddie, wrote a book on this, on like the Cassandra effect, right? Cassandra could predict the future, but she was cursed and no one would listen to her. And the thing is, even if you don't have the gift of prophecy, human beings ignore warnings. I'll take a mundane example, a medicine bottle. So you get a little prescription medicine and the labeling says, warning, this medication may impair physical or cognitive functioning. If affected, do not operate heavy machinery or drive a car, right? Standard warning. They've done studies, Angelo, and most people think that warning does not apply to them. I'm saying most people who consume the medicine, they look at that bottle and they go, yeah, okay. Some people might be affected by that, but not me, you know, and I'll know whether I'm affected. And really the warning should say, if you think this warning doesn't apply to you, you know, knucklehead, it really applies to you. And so one of the problems of human beings as a species, which is, I have to add a chapter to the book, that's why I haven't released it, is we dismiss warnings. And on a deeper level, Angelo, that means we dismiss wisdom and advice. So Angelo, you have spent your career advising family offices, right? And assembling the best wisdom and advice that you can share with those families, right? And so I said warnings, but all advice is a warning. All wisdom is a warning. For example, right? If I say, love thy neighbor as thyself, there's an implicit warning there. If you don't, your life is not going to be what it could be. Not going to be as rich. It's not going to be as rewarding. Even something as mundane as, Angelo, the best way to boil an egg is this. There's a little warning. If you don't do it that way, it's not going to be as good as it could have been. And so all advice and all wisdom is in fact a warning. And human beings ignore warnings. They go, yeah, that's obvious. I know that already. And they go off and blunder exactly the same mistake. You know, and yeah, so that's a really serious problem for the world. And, you know, it's, we always draw the wrong lessons. It was Hegel, the German philosopher. He said, we learn from history, right? You know that famous quote, we learn from history that we don't learn from history. And
it's a great
quote. However, Hegel was profoundly wrong. It's much worse than that. It's not, it would be okay if we didn't learn. The problem is we learn the wrong lesson and then we think we're smarter, right? We go, oh, they were idiots in the 18th century. Can't believe they did that. And then we go off thinking we've learned the lesson, but we haven't. We go off and make a bigger one, right? With more confidence because we're smarter. And so that's a really serious problem. And, you know, to come back to the themes that you had asked earlier, you know, we see what's going on in Canada, right? We saw what went on in Canada. We go, well, oh man, well, that would never happen here, right? Yeah. But what if it did?
Sure it could.
Right. But we don't say that. We go, oh, that would never happen here. Or people on a personal level say, they look at something somebody does and go, oh, what an idiot. Can't believe that person did that. I would never do that. And yes, you would. Maybe not that exact same thing, but you do something pretty damn close. And so instead of saying, oh, what happened in Canada would never happen here, or what happened in Australia or Austria, right? Also countries that had these severe lockdowns, is saying, under what circumstances might that occur here in the US? That would be a better question. And
much better.
Yeah.
Probably more of a comment than a question, but feel free to chime in. I think I promised the last time, and earlier I brought up China. We should probably do a whole show dedicated to it. Uh, yes, of course, there's issues with climate change, with ESG is important, and companies are getting better, individuals are getting better. I look at a very talented young lady, Greta, who's a big voice in ESG. And it does make me wonder, how come China's never brought into this, that they're horrific in their policies? Is it because US and multinational corporations have a lot of their operations there, and people are told if they want their funding, shh, be very quiet?
So
I'm in trouble again, aren't I, Adam?
yes, you are. I'm going to wag my finger at you before the authorities do. I'm just going to wag my finger at you. And then you say you don't have to arrest me because Adam waved his finger at me.
Exactly. That'll be my excuse before the Greta police come and get me.
To say, you get that Adam get out of jail card here. And so, China's point about, what we would regard as pollution, their point is this, and again, I'm not advocating one thing or another, right? But this is their argument, is that you in wealthier, more advanced nations, I use advanced, just developed countries, have been polluting the world's oceans and atmosphere for decades. And by virtue of which polluting of the global commons, air, land, and sea, you have advanced to the extent that you have. And now we, wanting to catch up, now you're putting handcuffs on us, And so that's their argument, right? That's their position. And my counter response to that would be, well, if we're doing something wrong and realize we did something wrong, then let's correct it. It's not an excuse to go, oh, therefore everyone else now gets to do something.
Exactly.
Wrong, right? That's the rejoinder. So why Greta and others don't single out, the dissonance, I'm just going to say the dissonance between, well, we see it over here and we see it there too, but we're only going to critique it in these areas, not those areas. And so there's a dissonance, there's an inconsistency, right? There are harsher words, but at the very least, it's an inconsistent position. And yeah, and I'm not judging here. Angelo and Adam are just asking questions.
And that's all we are. Now I'm going to ask another question that I have been hinting at, and now we're going to bring it a little bit up to the forefront a little more. It's another one. There has a term that has become a little popular lately called toxic masculinity. I say very much. Oh boy,
you're just wading right out in there. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. I say very much the opposite. And I hinted at it earlier with the compliancy of people. And arguably, this relates back to the less children in the world in many different countries, the weakening of men and its impact on the world. This is going to sound a little off topic, but that never stopped me anyway.
No, nothing. You know what, Angelo? I don't think anything has ever stopped you, but you go right ahead.
Probably not. Look at the ratio of women to men in college. It is stark. It's my issue.
It's like 60% women, 40% men. Yeah, something like that.
That's huge. My issue has nothing. Women, you are stepping up and getting things done. My issue is more with men. I don't know what it is. So one, we have an education system where women are in a far greater position to be educated. And I'm going to bring up something that I observe, and I have no statistical proof that Adam would probably want. I've been going to gyms for a long time. 10 years ago, you go to a gym, you go to CrossFit. It was rare to see a woman, I don't know, deadlifting, say, 4 plates, we would call it, that'd be 225 pounds. If I go to a CrossFit gym now and I don't see multiple women, often 130, 140 pounds, that could easily do that, I'm shocked.
Yeah, in a CrossFit gym, you're as likely to see a woman as men. It's like 50-50, at least in California. I mean, I've been to those gyms, yeah.
About 50-50. So, I mean, basically what I'm saying is what's happening with men? And I know there's people that I talk to that say, Angelo, the plastics, the lack of testosterone, it's going down. And maybe there is a degree of truth to that. I don't know. How does this tie into our conversation? Probably is the bigger picture question.
I don't know, Angelo. But so let me again say, you know, the cause could be again, my starting position is I don't know, right? So I'm just going to conjecture some things and posit some ideas. And you know, I think there's a newfound celebration in female physicality and strength. And I think when anyone celebrates themselves in that way, bravo, kudos. And because I don't want anyone to feel weak, right? That's not good. And so, okay, we want people to feel powerful to the extent that they can. But you're talking about the flip side of it is men are, in your perceptions, appear weaker than they used to be. And so I do know that we've seen, you know, phrases like toxic masculinity. It's scary, right? I mean, as a man, to think, oh, if I said something, someone could take it the wrong way, and all of a sudden, all these negative social consequences, right? And so I think everyone has become more guarded in the way they assert themselves in the world. And yeah, and I think the causes are many, you know, and I don't know about plastics in the water or estrogen levels or testosterone. Like, I don't know, you know, and I'm sure there are many reasons, but I think your intuitive sense is correct as an observation, right? And by the way, it may be a very healthy thing in the world to have more of a balancing between the masculine and the feminine. Now, having said that, it's very easy. For example, in financial markets, you get a stock that's gone it's overshot, like, you know, it's gone way overshot to the upside, and then often you'll find it overshoots to the downside. And so in these political pendulums, and when it's too far one way, it can go too far the other way. And both extremes are bad, of course. And there needs to be some kind of balance. And so I think there's that. And I do know, again, I can't off the top of my head cite any statistics or polls, but I do know that young people, Gen Zs, do not label themselves the way their even older brothers and sisters did, right? The millennials, much less their parents. And so by the way, I think the fact that they don't label themselves is a good thing. It's a bad thing when you insist that people have to use certain labels, right? That Jordan Peterson, for example, has gone off on that a lot. Like, you can call yourself anything you want, but you can't make me call you something. And so yeah, so it's really what we're entering in again is things we had taken for granted, right? When we started this little journey of ours, the Adam and Angelo show, we started talking about things we don't know about the world that we took for granted, right? Political things or economic things. That's true also on a social level, right? Everything it's very difficult because there doesn't seem to be much in the way of certainty, And this is actually a very perilous time for humanity, because in the past, when there were times of uncertainty, there were things that people could go back to. And now I'm talking about faith, whether it's faith in government or faith in God, whatever it is, there was something we could go back to. Yes, the world out there is scary, but at least I know this. And now where we are with people is the world is really scary and I don't know anything, right? And to go back to, that quote from Niels Bohr that you had cited and that I appropriated once, but I always did so with credit, is if you're certain about anything, you've not been paying attention, and what people are certain about is their own opinions, and that they shouldn't be, right?
Well, Adam, we probably, if you're generous, have 15 or 20 more minutes. And I only have about 35 questions, so I'm going to leave a lot of them.
Oh, good, the speed round. Okay.
I know. And how could we not have a discussion? And let's talk in today's world. My audience would be like, Angelo, if you don't bring it up, then we know something's wrong with you.
Uh-oh.
What do you think is happening? I'm going to use the broad vernacular, Web3. What we're seeing with NFTs and the rise and the metaverse. We've had discussions about Bitcoin. I know you feel there's a fatal flaw. We're not going to get into that or tokens or their currency of Web3 in this conversation, unless you want to. But I want a more.
I'll go in there.
Web3.
I'll go in there.
Okay, let's go.
You're waiting out in there.
I opened the door. You walked in.
Okay. So in fact, I know a lot of the key players in the metaverse, NFT, Web 3.0 space. Okay, and I know a lot of the key players, and there's a lot of excitement. The way to think about metaverse. Actually, we had talked before. What does Putin know about the world? That he made that as from his viewpoint a rational decision. Again, heinous, unconscionable. Really. So think about it like this. Which company in the world knows more about human beings and their day-to-day activities and how they spend their time and what they're looking at or not looking at and the trends than Facebook?
No one. And they changed their name to Metaverse.
Exactly. So what did Facebook, looking at all the things, going, oh, heck, we got to get into this? Right? What did Facebook know? Which goes back to what does Putin know? Or what does she know? Like in China, what does Biden know? What do they know that they make these decisions? So clearly, Facebook possessed with the most detailed information on human beings in the world, day to day, how they spend their time, what they value, who their friends are, go, oh, we are betting the farm on metaverse. Now, the beautiful thing, so what is a metaverse? So metaverse sounds really like complicated and stuff. It's basically online communities, large scale online communities. In the beginning, like say 6-7 years ago, that began as games, but the idea is that people will conduct more and more of their lives virtually.
And they are, and COVID pushed that along.
Right, COVID pushed it along. So there are exciting possibilities. In other words, it's going that way anyway. And people hear things like NFTs and they associate it with art because they go, oh, wow, people's artwork sold for 67 or 69 million, whatever. And they go, well, that's crazy. Just who would pay that for some pixels? But remember, don't dismiss anything that doesn't make any sense, right? They go, oh, that's just crazy. And they stop thinking about it. And so NFTs, which is really kind of just proof of ownership, right? Mm-hmm. Is at its simplest level, can be applied to lots of things other than art.
Exactly.
Right? Many, many things. And so the technologies are being developed, and they've been developing over the last 10 odd years, beginning with Bitcoin. The technologies have been created to create a whole new layer of transacting human affairs. I say layer. And so Bitcoin is cryptographically secure, theoretically, right? In other words, Angelo, when he isn't a gunslinger in the Old West, is a world-class computer hacker. You can't hack the blockchain. Now, I don't know whether you know, Angelo, I just found this out about 10 days ago. So the blockchain is level 1.
Right.
And then foundation, then a lot of things are built on top of that.
Like the Lightning Network.
Right, yeah. Everything on layer 2 is insecure, can be hacked. You got to let that land. The blockchain itself is cryptographically secure, and absolutely everything, so capital A, capital E, absolutely everything built on top, layer 2, cryptographically insecure, hackable. And you know, you've seen these high profile hacks, right? There was Axie Infinity about a month ago, and $600 million got siphoned out of Axie. And it took them 6 days before they realized, hey, Ethel, in bookkeeping, where's the 600 million?
Well, or before they wanted to tell the public.
Well, I mean, I know stuff, and no, they didn't know. And so the thing is, those aren't one-offs, is that literally everything, the blockchain is secure, but everything that has been built on top of it, everything. Imagine the bedrock in Manhattan, the reason there's so many tall skyscrapers in Manhattan is that it's solid bedrock that you find very few places in the world, which is why you can have so many skyscrapers right here. And it's not just because we like tall buildings in Manhattan, it's that we can do it because the bedrock is really strong. And in the same way, the blockchain bedrock is solid. And now imagine every building on top of it can be taken down easily. And you're not going to find these hacks immediately, right? The hackers aren't going to tell you, by the way, everything you're building, we can hack it whenever we want. It's really dangerous. Now, even in the conversation, Angelo, when I said I saw no intrinsic value in Bitcoin as an investment, I did say I was a great believer in blockchain technologies. These are really incredible, right? The layers that are being built that are going to transform human transactions, right? You figure financial institutions, they're going to go the way of record companies and publishing houses and newspapers. There's a tsunami coming. It's going to wipe those institutions out. And
well, hold on one second, Adam. And you think I would be 100% on board with that. And I kind of am. And that's DeFi. But I have a big but coming up.
Go for it.
The powers that be that often make up the Fed, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they're not going to crush it. That's probably a little too late now. But they're not just going to allow themselves to disappear. They're going to make themselves a part of it.
Well, yes, you're exactly right. To the extent that they can. So I'm going to share with you a historical anecdote. Maybe you know it. In 1936, a chemist named Wallace Carruthers, I think he was Canadian. We keep coming back to Canada. And blame Canada. That was that South Park movie. Anyway, he was the chief chemist at DuPont. And in fact, single-handedly, basically, he made DuPont, even though he was just one of the chemists, but he was a genius. So he comes running into the chairman's office, Lamont DuPont II, and says, look what I discovered. It was some really long, super long chemical name, like 50 letters, that they later called nylon. And I'm going to get to FIDI in a second. DeFi rather, FIDI, DeFi. FIDI is a district in New York, financial district. So DeFi. So so DuPont, the chairman, realizing, oh, we're going to make billions of dollars on this new fabric, nylon. Get this. He sets up a division to sell the hell out of nylon, and he sets up another division, a skunk works, to put nylon out of business. Think about that. This one of the most brilliant, you have to be like an Elon Musk to think like that. He said, okay, we got nylon, which means all of our competitors are going to be working on replacements. And I want to own the replacement to nylon as well as nylon. And so to go back to financial institutions, they're going to see the writing on the wall, and they're going to realize that they're going to be disintermediated, right, sooner or later. And they're going to have to make those decisions and put their own institutions like DuPont eventually, nylon, it's still around, but they got better fabrics. And that's what's coming. So it's a
For sure,
an inevitability.
You said something before when we started to talk about this that instantly got my attention, but I kept quiet for a change.
Uh-oh.
When it came to the metaverse, and maybe this applies to lots in Web3, you basically said, you know, a couple of very, very, very powerful people. The problem that the cyberpunks and the degens would have with what you said is that sounds like a centralized system, not the perfect,
No, I said I knew a couple of
decentralized world that they would want.
Wait a second. Hold on. I said I knew a lot of the key players in that space. I do.
But could I imply that VCs relative to how they structure with tokens and what they're
I'm not talking about VCs. I'm talking more central than that. But it's not a centralized system, right? And so think about the early days of the personal computer. There weren't many people who knew about the Altair. It was Steve Jobs and Wozniak and a bunch of hobbyists, right? With those, was it Texas Instruments and like those little systems that they were building and tinkering around. So they were in on it and they knew about it before everybody else. And in the same way, NFTs, by the way, evolved out of the metaverse. The metaverse, actually, metaverse is a concept and like has been around, not just as a concept, but like they've been working on it for like 6-7 years. It's just last year, all of a sudden, NFTs, the public started finding out about it. But this has been growing among enthusiasts, right? So when I say I know a bunch of the key players, I know a bunch of the key enthusiasts who were in there from the start.
I mean, I look at it as something like Second Life, going back even 20 years ago, was probably an early incarnation of the metaverse. But here's what I'll say about Second Life, and it's very intriguing.
Yes.
It only, and I'm using the word only, has about 1 million users, and it's been around for decades. Look at what the young ones are doing now, Adam. Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite. Everyone knows about Fortnite. Those have way, 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 way many participants, any one of them, let alone all three combined. Is that going to be the new age of the metaverse that makes the metaverse truly take off?
Well, if you look at massive online games, massive online games like the ones you're mentioning, there are like 3 games in the world right now, online games. This will astonish you. It astonished me, with over 1 billion active daily players.
Wow.
Think about that.
1 billion.
1 billion. And I know there's 7 billion odd people in the world. And I know a lot of them, me being one of them, who's not one of the people playing those games. And right, and you rule out a lot of people. You go, whoa, that means I've kind of like figured the age group playing those games, like 10 to 30, maybe 10 to 25. Oh my gosh, basically they're all playing them. Now, here's the thing about the games is like Minecraft and stuff. I used to dismiss them as mere escapist, like, oh, they're just playing games. And they are, but it's the social interactions they have with the other players. That's actually what's engaging them. It's not that Johnny is playing Minecraft. It's Johnny's playing Minecraft with like 7 of his best buddies. That's the social interaction. And think of the fun of a scavenger hunt or something, where you team up and, oh, great, scavenger hunt. And so these games, again, I used to, without researching it, I would just dismiss them. I'd go, oh, they're just shoot 'em up games, right? Like all these like shoot 'em up games, a lot of them are violent. But then when I started to delve into it, I realized actually they have a social life. Now, I think in-person social is much better than online.
But we're from a different era. They don't feel that way.
No, yeah, they don't. And but that's going on. And I, here's what I will say about the metaverse and those things is not, even though Facebook renamed itself Meta, don't think that the possibilities of the metaverse are represented by Facebook's first forays into that area. It is decentralized, and I will tell you that a lot of I mentioned those early enthusiasts that I know in this space, and they've been investing in this space for like 6-7 years, that they reject big corporate interests, like the whole ethos. All of crypto and blockchain is very much a libertarian, like, no, we don't want anyone telling us what to do. And so that's, I think, good. Freedom.
Probably the most common question I then get, because I've been talking about this for years. I'd like to say, and I'll take a little bit of credit, at least in the family office world, I've been at the forefront, even when I was called crazy and an idiot, which I'm still called quite a bit. But I would say, let's just go with some more billionaires and family offices are coming on board. I mean, I may use the verbiage, do your diligence, form a thesis, make a decision, mitigate your risk by the size of your position. You don't need to put 5,000 hours of research to make a 0.5% allocation to the right VC firms that are significant in the world of Web3. Now, I
will admit that. I remember you're asking me questions about this space like 7-8 years ago. I meant, wow.
Even
Angelo,
then, I was really ahead of the curve.
You were
really
indeed.
No one listened to me then. So here's my big picture question, and maybe my last question. We'll see. How? Probably not. How could family offices be more active broadly in the world of Web3 and the metaverse, and should they?
Okay, so all the aforementioned blockchain technologies are getting deployed in very many exciting ways. And even when you and I had these talks 7 or 8 years ago, when you asked me, so Adam, what are your views? And I go, I wasn't that impressed with Bitcoin as an investment, right? Just a coin. But I said, and you agreed, oh, but the technology's really incredible opportunities. And so, and I still think that. And so here's the thing, like anything, you want to do your due diligence and you want to, it's still an immature field, right? Think about the internet in the 1995. Think about all the.
I look at that as a positive. That's an opportunity to get in and make more asymmetrical returns.
Well, yes. And think about, for every Google, there was a Petco or whatever, and there were a lot of companies that went belly up. And think about also like search engines. Speaking of Google, at one point there were like 15 search engines. Remember, there was Ask Jeeves and Alta Vista and Yahoo. There were all these search engines, and Google was the one that sort of dominated, right? And So, I mean, there's some other players, but really it's Google. And so we're going to see shakeouts in this space as well. So you need to get the best possible advice in this area before you make any significant investments. Of course, it's almost trite to say. Yeah, and take your time. There's still, I'm sure there's a lot of, what's the word? Is it called FOMO, fear of missing out, right? I think there's a lot of that, like, oh my God, I got to get into this. And again, I always try to reduce things, Angelo, to heuristics and algorithms. Whenever you are feeling, oh my God, I got to get into that, that's exactly when you should not get into it, right? Because you're racing, you're behind, it's gone up a lot, it's probably shot the mark. Like in the early days of the internet, people thought, oh my gosh, the internet's going to change everything. And people forget that Amazon collapsed like 90% from where it was like in 1999 when the end of that bear market. Now it's since done very well, but you had to deal with a 90% loss. And I think we're going to see similar shakeouts in this space.
Oh, the 90% downturns have happened multiple times to Bitcoin and most other crypto. And I would say over the last 5 or 6 months, probably about 60 to 70% down for much. I'm going to go back. So I guess I lied about my last question. You were surprisingly in the world of Web3. You were very optimistic about 7 or 8 minutes ago, how I listened to your words on NFTs. I'm going to ask the same question.
Oh, wait a second. I said about the technologies and all of them. So NFTs, again, can be applied to many things. You could use an NFT to fractional real estate ownership, right? There are all kinds of things you can apply NFTs
Of course.
to.
So how do you think a family office could be active as an investor?
So again, it's such a specialized, I'm going to say about NFTs, the same thing I said about blockchain technologies and Metaverse, is that there aren't going to be a lot of winners in this space. There are not. There's going to be a lot of shakeouts, consolidations, and stuff. And you really need to get informed investment advice. And it's the kind of thing that a family office,
They're not going to get that at their bank.
Right. Well, not only are they not going to get it at their bank, they're not going to get it on their own. It's not like, I want to get my family into the NFT space, so I'll buy a couple of books and I'll become an expert. Oh, no, you're not. And so to really, in this, defer to, for example, I know family offices, and let's say they like impressionist painters, right? And they want to acquire some art. And they go, oh, but they wouldn't necessarily rely on their own judgment, right? They'd get some art experts to say, okay, of the impressionists, which ones are going to be the best investments, in your opinion, right? So you always want to get high level. Of course, you want to acquaint yourself. And here's a question, actually, this is an important question. It's one you and I have shared before, that you pose to anyone advising you, so any art expert or NFT expert or anything. And it's also a question you pose to yourself, and it's this: what precisely would I need to see to tell me that I was wrong, right? So an NFT person, enthusiast says, oh, you should buy these bored orangutans, not bored apes, right? We now got bored orangutans and bored penguins. Oh no, here's a better one. I should probably trademark this: petulant penguins. So petulant penguins, buy them. And then the question you should ask me is, so Adam, creator of petulant penguins, what would you need to see to tell me I should short petulant penguins, right? Instead of buying them, what would you need to see to tell you were wrong? That I
have a similar question. What would cause you to change your mind? But yes, they're on the same track.
Well, they're exactly, and the wrong frames it. Well, right, you could say change your view. And right, and you and I have used that question before. What would you need to change your view? And I think the reason I say wrong is it's polar opposite, like take the opposite side of it and argue against yourself, right? And because someone could say, well, I was wrong. I thought Bitcoin would double, but actually I think it might triple. like, oh, I was wrong, but in the same direction.
If I see what you mean.
So I want to take the opposite side to go, oh, because really, if you don't know when you're wrong, you can't possibly know when you're right. You can't. You need to always take the other side of every investment, right?
Do you or any of your relationships or thought leader friends have any opinion about the amazing rise of Yuga Labs, their development of Bored Ape Yacht Club, their purchase of other big players in the NFT space, and what they're looking to do both with their ape coin and with their metaverse? Are they poised to be the next Disney?
I can't give investment advice along those lines, so I don't know. But they're clearly, some smart players in the space, and I don't know that they're. I know that the whole NFT and metaverse space is bigger play than just that. For example, it's clear that Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter was about way more than I just want to ensure free speech on Twitter. Oh no. And if you read some of his tweets regarding Twitter, you see that Twitter's acquisition was a strategic move, not just he's annoyed because they won't let him say what he wants to say. For example, one of the things that he addressed was the notion, I don't think he used this phrase, but of sovereign identity. That if there's an account on Twitter that says Angelo, that it's you and not someone pretending to be you. And that notion of sovereign digital identity underpins almost everything, every smart contracts, everything done in this whole space. You need to know it can't be an anonymous digital account. We need to know who it is. And,
yes.
Right. And so yeah. And so again, if you look at what he said kind of elliptically, you realize Twitter play is a lot more than I just want to own Twitter because so people can talk freely. Oh no, it's a much more strategic play. And I think so the Bored Apes and Adam's petulant penguins are that the Bored Apes is a similar, they have a larger plan.
Oh, they sure do.
Yeah.
They sure do, that's for sure. And you mentioned something I should have brought up when you mentioned NFTs and blockchain, kind of important, smart contracts. We'll do a really deep Web3 dive, perhaps in about 6 more months. Okay, so I guess I did lie. Two final quick round robin questions. One related to the metaverse and a conversation we had 4 years ago in a podcast that got lost. It was basically about the future of AI and jobs. In the future, we will do that, but this relates to it. Will the Matrix, what we saw in the movie, mainly the first 20 years ago, but a little bit of their kind of part 4 a couple of months ago, will the Matrix inevitably become reality?
So the Matrix, okay, I'm going to answer that quickly and tie that question up. So I'm going to refer everyone to a paper written by Nick Bostrom, Bostrom. He wrote that book, Superintelligence, and he's an Oxford philosophy don. And he wrote a paper called, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?
I got to read this.
Yes, you really should, because it's a serious philosophical look. And he argues the probabilities that we are in a simulation right now. And it's a very interesting argument. And Elon Musk,
yes,
said the odds, having read the paper, said he thinks the odds are billions to 1. And so that we are in a simulation. And so the thing about the Matrix, by the way, the silly thing about the Matrix, it's too bad. The whole human beings are batteries, that wasn't actually the original script, because that doesn't make any thermodynamic sense. You're going to feed human beings, so the human being will supply you with energy. Well, there's some energy loss there, right? That's right. Basic physics, thermodynamics. The original reason that the machines enslaved human beings was to tap the distributed intelligence of human beings that the machines couldn't duplicate. That's much more interesting. And so read Nick Bostrom's paper.
Oh, I will.
And because he discusses that, and I'm just going to say the answer to that is an almost certain yes. Now, I'm not saying that we're tied up in those pods and things for malevolent purposes, but read Nick Bostrom's paper. It's really fascinating.
Which then this
academic is really going to keep you up at night. Yeah.
I mean, this then relates back a little bit to the metaverse, but there's going to be lots of metaverses and there'll be lots of losers. And that goes back to your question of identifying what could be a massive asymmetrical investment opportunity. Well, you'll have to do your own diligence and get lucky on that one, because that is going to be a tough one. Someone wanted me to ask, completely unrelated. It came in via text. I find it an interesting question, unrelated to everything that we've talked about so far.
I'll find a way to relate it.
Has a human being ever been cloned?
I don't know. The odds are probably highly likely, right? I mean,
Yes.
Think about it, right? I mean, just think about the probabilities where we were technology. We talk about technology, we think of, like electronic technology, but there's biotech, right? And so when was that sheep? She had a name. There was some, like 20 years ago, right? It's been a while. Right?
Oh, yes.
Right?
It's been a long time.
Sheep, right? It's been a long time, but they cloned a sheep. I think it was a sheep. Again, I'm doing it from memory. It was so long ago, I've forgotten about it. And so you figure if they were able to do that then,
right,
you got to figure there are labs around the world that have since gone much farther. They've kept underground. It's not the kind of thing you want to tell everybody about, because that would create a political firestorm, right? But you gotta if you just follow the trajectory of technological progress, I'm sure if they were cloning that sheep, I forget the name, that right now they could do human beings. Now, by the way, that's on a fetus into a human being level. It doesn't mean it's the same person, right? Because there are all kinds of environmental factors and stuff. But I have to believe that the odds are highly likely that, just again, following the arc of technological, and in this case, biotechnological progress.
Well, Adam, as a final hook, if the audience could only see about the 20 questions I had to leave on the cutting room floor in about 6 more months, that's going to make a great episode. So they'll just have to be a little patient. Adam, do you have anything relative to projects you're working on, your book that you mentioned you're going to need to write one more chapter, that you would like to leave our audience with a parting idea, thought, or a way to connect with you?
So, you can always drop me they can follow me on Twitter. I am Adam Robinson. Talk about sovereign identity. Adam Robinson.
Recommended. I am Adam Robinson is a great follow.
Yeah, and I have the domain. I am Adam Robinson. But the easiest one, you can also email us. That would be an easy one to do. Just shoot me a DM on Twitter. I'm besieged, but I do my best to try to respond to people. And yeah, I'm doing a lot of cool things some of which I shared off the record with you. And yeah, a lot of things, a lot of fun things I'll be unleashing on the world in the next 2-3 months. Yeah,
I'm excited. I'm excited, and I know we'll follow up a little personally in the next couple of days or so. So that'll be great. Well, everyone, it's been another 2 hours plus with Adam Robinson. It went by so quickly. Millions of more questions, like I said, on the cutting room floor that we'll have to wait to next time. It's amazing to have someone, Adam, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I would say you, James Altucher, and some others are like among my favorites, because you're like how you all think. Maybe it's the chess thing. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, James and I both chess players. Sure. You
got to get some poker players on. If you know some great poker players, tell them to turn them my way.
Think about that. Yeah,
because Adam, they make decisions with incomplete information.
Oh no, I know that, that's more real world, right? Chess.
I think so. Yes.
Oh, no, not I
actually
think so. That's a definite.
Right.
Chess, you see all the pieces. You see everything. I don't know what Angelo's thinking,
Right.
right? But I see all the pieces on the board.
And then even with poker, one difference to real life, a pretty important one, isn't you have to follow rules. In real life, depending on who you are and what you can get away with, sometimes you don't.
Sometimes, right. But the key thing about poker that's so important in life, and then I'm gonna end with this, is it goes back to what we started at the beginning, what we know. And in poker, you realize it's a game of probabilities, and you don't really know anything, right? You can do the calculus based on, stochastic distributions of what they might have, and the cards that you see and the cards that you have. But at the end of the day, it's a probability, right? And assuming we weren't bluffing, you adjust your bet size accordingly.
Exactly.
Right. And since most people, when they invest, are not trying to bluff the market, is to always calibrate around your conviction level and adjust your bet size, your investment size accordingly. That's really important.
For sure. In my little close, to be continued, everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm the host of the Angelo Robles podcast. I'm the founder of Family Office Association. You can all follow me. I'm very active on social media. I'm not as big as Adam, but I'm trying. I'm Family Office. Pretty happy to have that name on Twitter and my main platform, YouTube, where many of you are probably going to be watching this. So it may be called the Angelo Robles podcast, but my channel platform very simply is Family Office. And on Instagram, speaking of the metaverse, I am Angelo Robles Meta, META. I'm very active. That's more on the personal side and keeping things a little bit fun. But I may recommend that you take a look at that as well. And if you're a family office, and if you're interested in peer-to-peer connectivity, opportunity for amazing, very private gatherings, our research, our thought leadership, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say the work that I'm doing on disaster prep for billionaires. You have to join and be a part of Family Office Association. You could go to familyofficeassociation.com to learn more about membership. And again, in work that we're doing relative to disaster prep and others, creating a family office, international structures, which interplay into the disaster prep for family offices. That is going to be more of a consulting assignment. So it's all online. You'll have a chance to reach out to me if you desire. Again, that's familyofficeassociation.com. Adam, you've been fantastic as always. Look forward to catching up personally very soon.
Yes, and I would like to add one final note, an addendum to the disaster planning, is that there's a secondary benefit in that the whole point of disaster planning is to learn to think about the future, right? And the insights gained in preparing for a disaster will also reveal investment opportunities, not just like avoiding the flood. It's like, oh, well, we should invest in canoes or whatever it is. I mean, I'm being silly with canoes. Who knows?
That has proven to be 100% correct. From drones to other things that I've been discussing relative to disaster prep, but I don't want to give away all my secrets.
Nope.
And Adam, this is great. I look forward to us catching up more personally about that.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Adam Robinson, everyone. Thank you.
Yay.